Welcome in. Seahawks Today by Chat Sports. Tyler Jones here. Thanks for stopping by. On today's show, we're going to tell you everything you need to know about Dan Quinn. We are going to give him a fair shake on his potential to be the next Seattle Seahawks head coach. At this point in time, he's the odds-on favorite. So I'm going to break down the good, the bad, and the ugly about Dan Quinn. And then you get to decide if you want him to be your next head coach or not. In the meantime, as we cover this coaching search, we are trying to track down to get to 89,000 subscribers. And I have very good news. We are less than 500 subscribers away from reaching that next milestone. So keep it locked in to Seahawks Today throughout this entire coaching search. Help us get to 49K. And when they do hire a coach, you'll be the first to know about it. Subscribe now. We'll get started with today's show. Let's start with number one, the pros of Dan Quinn, his ties to Seattle. This is somebody that's very familiar with the Seahawks organization that has been a part of some successful years with the Seattle Seahawks. 2 separate stints in Seattle, including winning a Super Bowl with this franchise. Dan Quinn is well-liked, well-respected among the Seahawks faithful, and knows how this organization operates, has seen what it's been like when the Seattle Seahawks are at the very top, and has been a part of the Seahawks' success at the highest level. Now, the cons list. We're not calling him con man, by the way. But his downfall in Atlanta. Things started out really good, actually, for Dan Quinn. Got Matt Ryan an MVP, went to a Super Bowl, and then 28-3 happened, and they never rebounded from there. After that Super Bowl loss to Belichick and the Patriots, Dan Quinn's overall record was below 500, 24-30, including the postseason. He did not win another playoff game after that loss. Things went downhill quickly. And we're going to talk about this more in just a second, but when Kyle Shanahan left and couldn't really find the right replacement for Shanahan, things fell apart fast. And I don't think that can be understated. That, yes, there were some good moments, but there was some bad times there too, and Seattle has to understand the risk of that with the possibility of hiring Dan Quinn. So let's ask you now, should the Seahawks hire Dan Quinn? Why for yes and for no? Our pinned comment today. Weigh in. Tell us what you think if Dan Quinn should be that guy or not. We are offering a great number of Seahawks hats on sale now, but also with free shipping. So you don't have to give up your money to the United States Postal Service. Instead, you get to keep it in your pocket, and you get to come away with one of these great-looking Seahawks hats. Now, here are a few examples, but there are plenty more available on sale now. Get yours today at chatsports.com/Seahawks hats. The link is in the comments and description of today's video. Chatsports.com/Seahawks hats. These hats look great. You don't want to miss your opportunity to get these with the free shipping as well. Chatsports.com/Seahawks hats to get yours today. Back to the pros now. His head coaching experience. Of these candidates that we've talked about a lot over this last week or so, not a lot of them have head coaching experience, have seen what it's like to succeed and what it's like to fail at that level. I could argue that maybe Dan Quinn knows what he would not do this go-round, that he's potentially learned from the mistakes he's made, and he's coached in a Super Bowl. I mean, that's a big deal. Yes, they didn't bring home the title and finish the job, but that in itself is a big accomplishment just to get to that point. So the head coaching experience, I think there's more good than bad that comes out of what Dan Quinn has known to get to that point. Now, the cons. You look at that head coach experience, his offense without Kyle Shanahan was simply a disaster. Matt Ryan went from playing at MVP level with Julio Jones and his offense clicking and, just being a few plays away from winning a Super Bowl to just falling apart without Kyle Shanahan, with him going to San Francisco. That Falcons team never averaged more than 26 points a game after Kyle Shanahan left town. Shanahan's last season, they averaged over 33 points a game. Now, even with that said, and they had Steve Sarkisian as a coordinator. He's now the head coach of the Texas Longhorns. Derek Cutter was a coordinator in Atlanta at one point. even those offenses still did better in almost every statistic than this Seahawks offense did this past year. So for Dan Quinn, if he is the head coach, he's got to get the OC right because we've seen the hit and the miss on that front. Now to the pros. He is one of the best defensive minds in all of football. If I were to talk about thought leaders in today's NFL of just who knows the game and knows how to coach that side of the football, one of the first names that's going to come up by everyone is going to be Dan Quinn. And year after year, it's the consistency. What he did in Seattle, now with Dallas, year and year again, continually turning out one of the best defenses in the NFL. And you look at the Cowboys over the years, for the most part, it hasn't been their defense that's cost them. Even this past week, a lot of people were pointing to the defense. And I would say, well, they didn't get much help from Dak turning the ball over twice. That kind of set them backwards. But that said, the defense, what he's done, we know this Seahawks defense needs some work. If they haven't played to their potential, Dan Quinn is not going to be satisfied with the product that we're seeing from the Seahawks defense right now. Con, some of you might call this a pro. For me, with the direction the Seahawks are looking at, he is very similar to Pete Carroll. He comes from the Pete Carroll coaching tree. His coaching style, very similar to Pete. And with moving on from Pete Carroll, I think a lot of people were saying that you wanted a fresh voice, that you wanted a change, that you wanted something differently. But how different is Dan Quinn? If you went through all these loopholes to move on from Pete Carroll, then what were you potentially thinking if you just hired the Kirkland brand version of Pete Carroll at that point? That's where it starts to get messy. Like, why not a Jim Harbaugh type or a Ben Johnson or a Mike Vrabel or something like that? Makes you think. Was it a mistake to move away from Pete Carroll, by the way? I know a lot of you were big Pete defenders on this channel. Now that we know what we know, that Dan Quinn's likely to be the next Seahawks head coach, was it a mistake? HY for hell yes, HN for hell no. Let me know what you think. Culture. That is something you're going to hear a lot from people like John Schneider and from Matt Hasselbeck and others. We've heard it from KJ Wright talk about culture and, establishing a commitment to that culture and doing things the right way. And you look at Dan Quinn in the Seahawks community and around the NFL, Dan Quinn is respected, widely respected. You're not going to hear a ton of negativity about how Dan Quinn goes about his business, the way he operates things. This would bring instant credibility to the Seahawks and how they operate things and trying to attract free agents and all that. Dan Quinn, I think, is a selling point on that culture end of things. Back to the cons list. He's not an offensive guy. It's very clear. And this is an offensive world. In today's NFL, great offense beats great defense. That's one thing that's changed now compared to several years ago. And the way that the game is going, more teams are hiring offensive-minded coaches rather than defensive-minded coaches. So if you hire Dan Quinn, are you going backwards from where the rest of the league is going against the grain in this type of move? That's what I wonder. Is this a step in the wrong direction based on the way the game is evolving? Another pro of hiring Dan Quinn. He gets the most out of every player. Case in point, specifically Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons is one of, if not the best defensive players in all of football. And Micah Parsons was an animal right from the jump, right from the get-go with the Dallas Cowboys. And Dan Quinn is largely credited for that development of Micah Parsons and turning him into the player that he is today. And it's not just Micah. It's a number of guys on that Cowboys defense and other players through the years. Dan Quinn has a track record of developing those players and getting to their full potential there. Micah Parsons might not be the player he is today without Dan Quinn. Now, before we get to one more thing, should the Seahawks hire an offensive or defensive coach? Dan's obviously a defensive guy. A lot of you want an offensive guy. What do you think? O for offense, D for defense. Weigh in. Tell me what you think. Last on the list of the cons of Dan Quinn. Not the most qualified of the potential candidates for this Seattle Seahawks coaching job. You look at some of the names out there, right? Bill Belichick. Whether you like Belichick for the job or not, Belichick is without question. If this was a resume contest, the most qualified for not just this job, but any job out there. Resume, he takes the cake. Jim Harbaugh has won at every level and just won a national championship and is more qualified than Dan Quinn is. That's one thing I look at with Dan Quinn. If you're going to hire him, it's not a resume hire. It's a fit because he doesn't have the resume these others do. Is he underqualified? Maybe so. He's got head coach experience, but he doesn't have the track record of some of these other coaches do. Subscribe now to Seahawks Today, the latest happenings in your favorite team. We got you covered, talking about the Seattle Seahawks each and every day throughout this coaching search. Keep it locked in. Subscribe now, and we'll see you next time here on Seahawks Today.